Hello and welcome to our Seek Safely Roundtable podcast. I'm Jean Brown. Joining me today we have Deborah Goldstein, Seek board member and the founder of Driven Professionals, and we have Ginny Brown, who is Seek's founder. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how the pandemic has brought so much change to all of our lives and what kind of impact we think that is going to have on how people are interacting with self-help. We thought that Deborah and Ginny would be great people to have this conversation with because they can each bring sort of a different perspective. Deborah is a coach and does a lot of work with people who are looking to make improvements in their personal and professional development. Ginny, as we know, we had her on the podcast recently to talk about self-help and mental health. So she's going to be talking a bit from that mental health perspective. So I just wanted to start off talking a little bit about how we know that this pandemic, an unprecedented circumstance in all of our lives, has impacted us all in various ways, but every person has been experiencing some type of upheaval in their lives. And as a result, so many people are making big changes in their lives. So many people have moved. I moved actually in the midst of the pandemic. I moved to a different city, and that is, changing what my day-to-day life looks like. A lot of people have experienced real hardships, like either losing a job or grief because of losing family members, dealing with illness. Other people are finding that they're sort of reevaluating their priorities and what's important to them, and that's causing them to choose to make changes. So I think, as we know, all of us have been experiencing some level of change throughout this period of time. And, with Seek, our interest is always looking at the self-help industry, a self-help industry that hopefully operates professionally and safely. And we anticipate that all of these changes that people are experiencing and making are going to cause people to look more and more at self-help as a resource. So we want to just dive into that topic to see kind of what it is that people are looking for and how they might start interacting with this industry. So we're going to start a little bit. First, we're going to kind of focus in with Deborah on what I consider the more sort of traditional locus of self-help, which is people who are sort of choosing to make changes in their personal and professional lives. So Deborah, I'm wondering, through your work with Driven Professionals and as a coach, what you've been seeing with the type of changes that people have been making.
Thank you, Jean. Let me give some context here. Predominantly, my coachees and my clients, organizational clients, are professional services, marketing professionals, real estate professionals, so a specific segment of the population. And I am seeing everything under the sun. I'm seeing people who have been laid off. I'm working with people who have been laid off. I'm working with people who have always hated their job and now are realizing, why have I stuck with my job for so long? I have been working with mothers who have left their jobs because they must provide childcare. They're becoming instant teachers overnight. And then there are people who have recognized that life is not a dress rehearsal, and why am I doing something that is not bringing me any kind of joy? And then there's the type of person that just has not been able to acclimate to this new way of working, or what was supposed to be a short-term way of working, which continues to expand. And we don't know when things are going to open up again for them. So all of these types of people are at a crossroads and looking for other ways of doing things, opening their lens in order to see other perspectives. And that's looking outside and also looking within to figure out what really is going to satisfy them on different levels.
Yeah. It's so interesting I think the whole idea of people, like you said, realizing that life is not a dress rehearsal. I think that's been such an interesting outcome of this pandemic. People kind of deciding, like, if I'm going to live my life the way I want to live, the time is now, right? It's not tomorrow. Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I also wanted to, if I may, share my perspective.
Sure.
And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was scared. I was really scared from a safety perspective, from a business perspective. I tend to think that the whole world is going to fall apart in a moment. Thankfully, we're a little bit more resilient than that. And in some ways, my view became very, very myopic in that if Michael and I were healthy and safe, nothing else mattered. In other words, I wasn't going to freak out about anything except for the fact that we are doing things to keep us healthy and safe. And that to me was really helpful in that moment because I was able to focus on that. And once I got to check those off, I got to see with a little bit more of a breath what else I could be doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think a lot of us had that experience, and you articulated it really well. It really, the sort of crisis aspect of it really stripped away a lot of the other stuff for people. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I felt that too. It was like, this is my number one priority. It's just kind of keeping everybody safe and fed, and everything else is like, it just doesn't really matter. And then it's interesting because I think maybe that's why, it almost became a joke, right? About people like baking bread or learning how to play an instrument, right? Because suddenly it was like, okay, well, I'm home and I have all this time and I might as well just do something that I've always wanted to do and never kind of got around to. And I think that's also caused a lot of people to start reevaluating what they're now going to spend more of their time on. So what have you been offering to people? What have you been suggesting to people as you're trying to guide them through this period of transition?
I'm offering and guiding them with tools that I've been using for a while now in my coaching. And it is very much looking within before you look to the outside. And I start with coaching, all of my coaching clients, I start with really exploring their values. What is it that what are your foundational values? Like health and safety? What are your current values, like dependability and compassion and reliability? And then what are your future values? I recognize that mine is advocacy. I didn't think that I was, but I am an advocate now. So exploring values, and that is kind of the baseline, and then exploring aspirations. I like to to challenge people with an exercise that I call Imagine, where you put yourself to your retirement party. And who will be speaking at your retirement party? And what will they be saying about you? What do you want your resume to look like? And it's not about job titles. It's about what you've contributed and how you have changed your part of the world. And then between those pieces, values, which is kind of your foundation, and aspirations, which is where you want to go to, in between, exploring your strengths. And strengths in this case are not just what you're good at, but as Marcus Buckingham talks about, what you're good at that lights you up. And from there, you've got 3 points that you can work from. So once you have the where you are coming from, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there, think about what you need to support yourself that you don't have right now to get to your aspirations, and recognize that you have the ability to craft and design your life, whether it's employing resilience and building that resiliency muscle. I'm doing a lot of work around resilience right now. Is it that you are starting to anchor habits and practices in your life in order to make sure that you get to your aspirations? And the last thing that I'll mention is that people get to recognize with perspective, I say going up to the balcony to see perspective, that social connection is actually connecting with people. Seeing people even on the other side of a Zoom is social connection.
Mhm.
However, social media is not social connection. I think that that's been a really difficult part. I know that Ginny's going to be talking about some mental health aspects. I think that social media has been contributing in a negative way towards that mental health piece during
Mhm.
this time.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people have sort of realized that social media is it's an interesting tool that we can have a relationship with, and I think sometimes that relationship can be positive, but you have to be so intentional about how you use it. And I think the way that it's sort of designed and operates for a lot of us, if you're not very intentional, it like you said, it doesn't foster connection. It creates something else that's not fulfilling in the same way. And I think we've all kind of realized in not having true social connection how important that is for all of us.
I think a lot of times, sometimes social media becomes a black hole where it just swallows up a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, you're like, what did I just do? Did I learn something? Did I really talk to anybody else? You know, it's and there's like an addictive quality to it as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
you know, it's a pretty interesting phenomenon that we really need to grapple with.
And grapple with it with the recognition that when I post something on social media, I get to choose what face I want to present. And what happens with my clients is they come to me and they feel that they are just not doing enough. They aren't enough because they're reading about other people's high points on social media, and they're forgetting that that's a snapshot, whereas they live with themselves 24/7 and they see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. Right. Yeah, they know that they're watching 3 hours of Netflix each night and not going out and saving the world, but we're probably all kind of doing the same thing. So yeah, for sure. So I know also, Deborah, through Driven Professionals, you offer a tool called intentional productivity. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm using with my clients in order to help them recognize at the crossroads, or anybody who is working towards being more intentional about their productivity. So it's not a very sexy name. However, nobody has enough time to do it all, but we certainly have abundant time to do what is important for us. So intentional productivity brings you through this process of what you would like to do because it's important to you. It helps you develop the mindset. It helps you figure out what is important, and it provides the tools for you to design the habits and the practices and your schedule in order to get to your aspiration, your aspirations and your goals.
Right. So Driven Professionals has offered a discount for Seek supporters. So I'll post a link to that in our show notes, so that if you're interested in taking a look at it, and if you choose to buy it, it will also support Seek. So I'll put a link there for everybody. All right, thanks for that perspective, Deborah. We're going to move on to talk a little bit more about the sort of mental health side of things with Ginny. We know that the pandemic, like I said, it's been hard on people in a lot of different ways. And I think it's a good thing that we've all been sort of open about acknowledging the challenges to our mental health that people are feeling. People are feeling anxiety, they're feeling isolation, they're feeling, worry over their jobs, like Deborah, you were speaking of as well, or their finances. People are experiencing grief, either from the loss of a loved one or for the loss of what life was before. Grief is not always just about losing a person. Sometimes it's about losing experiences or losing kind of the way things were. People have also been having relationship struggles. That's part of the upheaval that many people have had. They're, kind of expecting an uptick in divorces and separations through this pandemic. So Ginny, what kinds of concerns have you been seeing people bring through your practice?
Well, I think it's really about anxiety and depression more than anything else. And the whole idea of loss of control. Mm-hmm. So when I can't control things in my life, that's off-putting, and I feel kind of untethered and not knowing what the future is going to be. And the interesting thing is none of us know what the future is going to be. And no one knows what the future is for all of us or for each of us individually. Things happen. And I can't know today what's going to happen necessarily tomorrow. But we live with the illusion that we do know. Mm-hmm. Because we have a job or because we have things that we do all the time and we have a schedule and et cetera and so on. And I think the pandemic just kind of blew that up in everyone's face. That we really don't have so much control all the time. I think I've also seen everyone is, I want to say, prickly. Like everyone is just kind of irritated, and less patient and kind of snappy. And then there's also a lot of people that are just angry at regulation. They're angry at what they feel is an invasion and an imposition in their life. And part of that is, kind of a lack of confidence in information, both through our leadership and also in media. So, that kind of brings us to a little bit of, I think, what directs people more towards self-help resources. But let me stick for a minute with the anxiety and depression and this whole concept of this being really traumatizing for some people. Feelings ignite feelings. Experiences ignite past experiences. So a concept that I don't know if I've ever shared this with Seek listeners before, but it's something that George always talked about, and he calls it the Slinky Effect. So our life is kind of like a slinky, and we have experiences that go along the coil of that slinky, and its experiences and its feelings. And as our lives expand, our slinky grows with new experiences and new feelings. And when you get a feeling or an experience that's very similar to something that happened in the past, your slinky tends to collapse. So when we have negative experiences or really serious traumas, feelings of abandonment, feelings of such uncertainty and tremendous lack of control or disconnection, the experience of that today connects to the experience in our past. And then it's that much more intense. So sometimes in mental health, it's kind of sorting through the Slinky effect, pulling that Slinky out again to say, okay, this feels like something that happened in your past. And that's probably why it feels so intense right now. But it's a little bit different. And let's look at how you negotiated that trauma. Let's look at how you negotiated that level of anxiety or depression, because some of those things will help you through today as well. But that whole idea of uncertainty and loss of control is very igniting for mental health issues and mental health concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting as you talk about that. It kind of makes me think of, when you read like novels or journeys with a sort of hero's quest, it's so often the character is somebody who lived a very routine kind of life, and then that routine is upended. And it's that loss of the routine kind of breeds this illusion of control, like you're saying, and then suddenly they're thrust into a situation where they have to act in ways that they've never acted before. And
Mhm.
I think that's sort of what all of us are experiencing right now, that loss of routine.
Yeah, and I think what Deborah said is also very important, that we've been put in a situation where a lot of our actions are reactions, which are very different. So you want to, when I'm working with my clients, I want to talk to them about their behaviors. Are they just reactions to what's going on, or are they choices in the way to cope with what's going on? And to get that clearer, to make that, again, using Deborah's word, more intentional, more aware, more conscious of the fact that I do have some choices. Yeah, I can't control everything that's going to happen today or tomorrow necessarily, but I do have choices about how I can respond to things. So I can respond with fear, I can respond with anger, I can respond with incredible worry. And what we know is that fear, anger, and worry really are not helpful. They're just not helpful. So then we make that shift to say, okay, I can have those feelings, but I also need to remember that feelings are really slippery. They come and go. They're often unbidden. We don't always know where they came from, but we need to look at them and not let them run the show. So we need to recognize the feeling, not squash it, but at the same time, not let it determine our actions. We need to take a deep breath and kind of look at that, the fear, worry, the anger, and give ourselves an opportunity to kind of see that. And I think for lots of people, that's really the function of therapy, is to try to help them talk that out, look at that, ask themselves questions, and maybe try out new ways of seeing something.
So I know, that kind of emotional intelligence and resiliency is challenging enough for adults. There has also been some discussion throughout this pandemic about how it's been impacting younger people, for whom I think that kind of resiliency is even more difficult, as they're like not fully formed people emotionally yet, So what have you been seeing with younger people in your practice?
Well, I think with my adolescent clients, and especially adolescence is just a really tough time for people, period, because you're trying to figure out who the heck you are. And there's been so much really confusing information for kids today. So that's kind of tough. The adolescents, I think it's a harder struggle for them right now. The 20-somethings, what I'm seeing is they're lost, they're confused, they're angry. I've come through college. I haven't really had the college experience. It still cost me money. I can't find the job that I want. So there's a lot of upsetment, I think, for people who are of college age and are trying to figure out how to step into their adult world, because the adult world right now does not feel so strong. Okay, it's shifting and it's changing, and as a result of that, again, I feel like a lot of 20-somethings feeling really untethered. So a resource that I often use with my 20-something clients is something very similar to Deborah's Intentional Productivity, and it's a book by Christine Whelan, who's a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she's also on our advisory board. And it's kind of like a workbook, but it's called The Big Picture. And it's really helping people to look at, what is your purpose in life? Where do you want to go? What's, again, looking at values as a very foundational piece of who you are. What are you good at? What really lights you up? What is it that you love, as well as what is it that you do well? And then looking at, where does relationships fit into that? Where does responsibility? So that's become a good resource that I've used with a number of clients that fit into that age bracket. Some of my older clients, it's just, there's a lot of fear. There's been a lot of fear, and it's kind of calming everyone down a little bit to just say, okay, all right, let's kind of breathe and let's take our time to figure out what it is you can control right now. What do you need to do to feel safe and comfortable? You have a right to make those decisions for yourself, and encouraging people to kind of think that through rather than just be really reactive about what they're involved in.
Mm-hmm. So I know when we had, I think it was on our May roundtable discussion, we discussed with you and Dr. Doyle, another SEEK board member, about self-help and mental health. And one of the things that he often talks about is this idea that self-help is almost like it fills in holes for people who don't have access to more formal or traditional mental health care. So I'm curious as to what you think about how this sort of increase in mental health issues for people because of the pandemic might play on the self-help industry.
Well, first of all, the mental health system is glutted right now. People can't get appointments. Even if people are reaching out to get a therapist, they're really having a hard time finding someone who is open and who will see them. There's always been the insurance problem, for people finding a provider that's going to cover the expenses. So the system is jammed up right now. And people not being able to get help that they're seeking in those systems, self-help is going to take the overflow. Okay, so then people are going to look at self-help resources. And what I mentioned before, I think there's a tremendous lack of confidence in mainstream help, leadership, and media information. And I think that pushes people to seek alternatives. And sometimes the alternative is not necessarily a very good resource because they don't know what they're talking about, but they're giving validation to my feeling of distrust. They're giving validation to the fact that I think this is all BS. Okay. So they get me. And so I'm jumping into a resource that really doesn't have a foundation to provide really good mental health for that individual. So that's my fear, that when people are so distrustful and also feel very desperate, we're talking about two areas of tremendous vulnerability to be taken advantage of. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about people going then into self-help resources that really are not going to be helpful, but sound great. They sound great, because we do know there's a lot of people out there on the circuit that what makes them financially successful is that they're pretty charismatic and they can talk.
Yeah. It's really interesting because in sort of preparing for today, I was reading up a little bit about how past pandemics have created big changes in the world. And one of the articles that I read, and I'm going to post a number of links to some of the articles that I found especially interesting. But one of the articles that I read was talking about how after the 1918 pandemic, there was like a big turning away from science, particularly in more developed countries where there was already like a strongly established sort of trust in science, as opposed to kind of underdeveloped nations. Their science actually increased because our understandings of diseases was getting better at that time. But in countries where there already was kind of a robust scientific community, a lot of people were turning away from it. And I think it's the same thing, the contentiousness over wearing masks and that kind of thing, that's not new. That happened during that pandemic as well. People had different ideas about how to approach it. And I thought that was really interesting that we're kind of circling back to these experiences that we've had. So yeah, like I said, I'll post some of those articles that I read that I thought were really interesting. This other one that I read that it touches on something that you've both mentioned, which is this idea of control. I read an article from the New Republic called "The Seductive Lie of Post-Pandemic Self-Optimization." And I'm just going to read this one quote. The article was sort of discussing the types of self-improvement articles that were coming through during the pandemic, which dealt a lot with, either like fitness goals or people optimizing their relationships or somehow using the pandemic as an opportunity for personal improvement. So this quote is, "Taken together, these articles convey the sense that while the world is a brutal and unequal place, our happiness, our health, our success, and our relationships are all fully within our control. This kind of hyper-individualization might seem benign, even empowering, but the message at its core is ultimately one of painful isolation. If you are struggling in any of these areas, it's your own fault. While these ideas are marketed as novel and modern, they are in fact nothing new. The use of pop psychology and ideas of contagion for social improvement have a deeper, more fraught history. It would be a mistake to forget the lessons of the past year and return to the seduction of hyper-individuality, not just because it leaves the vast majority of people behind, but because fundamentally it doesn't work." I thought this was so interesting because it kind of reflects an idea that we've often talked about at Seek, that a lot of self-help resources seem to be offering like a magic bullet to find your happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that's kind of that like this idea of having control everything, it's an illusion. A lot of times, yeah, there are circumstances that are outside of your control. And what you do have control over is your response to those circumstances, but not the circumstances themselves. And we are always concerned with the type of self-help that puts the onus on the individual, and that if it's not working, that it's something wrong with you, right? As opposed to something that's outside of your control, and you can try to change the way that you're responding, but you're not going to change the circumstances just with your will,
And I think it's important to make the distinction between being able to, there's a difference between judging myself and having some self-compassion. So always, we want to look at what are the circumstances. This isn't, as you said, Jean, this isn't of my doing, or it isn't my total responsibility where I am in this particular place. And if I'm struggling, I need to be compassionate with myself about that, so that then I can begin to look at, okay, are there places where I can get more help? And there are periods in everybody's life where we need more help from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
We need someone to, pull us up by the hand, and we do, as human beings, we seek that. We just want to make sure we're seeking in the right place, which is what our mission is really all about. Because people are always going to seek, because there are times that, yes, I need more, I want more, and I need help. And that's not a weakness. It's not a weakness. It's a recognition of who I am and what the circumstances are and what I'm about. So, that's true for everyone. But to just say, oh, you're just not trying hard enough is ridiculous. Depression is a real thing.
Yeah.
It isn't just, oh, the person is not being strong enough or something. No. Yeah. It's a very real thing, and people need help through it.
And I like this idea too of trying to remember that for so many of us during the pandemic, what we were really lacking, like we were saying before, was true connection with people.
Gosh.
That, we want to, any changes that we're going to make or any improvements that we want to take for ourselves, I think it's really useful to remember that it's not always just about yourself, that our place within a community is important, not just for how we impact our community, but how the community impacts us. And that this, we saw how important these connections are to us when we didn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
And so going forward, we need to hold on to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to pop in here because connection is such an important word. I spent a half of a day watching a Atlantic Magazine conference, and it was called In Pursuit of Happiness. And we can put the link to the replay in the notes as well.
Sure.
And one of the pros, the experts, came on and said, I can describe happiness in 5 words. Happiness is connection, full stop.
Yeah.
And that it makes so much sense. And it was a profound moment to recognize that, whoa, that's true. And that's stayed with me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's a good note for us to end on, unless either of you have anything else to add. I'd like to invite everyone to connect with us. We thank you for watching. Thank you, Ginny and Deborah, for both of your perspectives. And you can connect with us across our platforms. We're on Twitter, @Seek Safely, on Facebook. We usually have some good discussion going on there. And like I said, I'll put, a lot of the things that we've discussed, I'll put in the show notes so people can access those resources as well. So thank you for watching and listening, and be sure to like our video or subscribe so you can see our future podcasts we put out the last Friday of every month. All right. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jean.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Deborah.
Thank you.